10 black actors who are gay, then and now 2026. What if the biggest names in black Hollywood were hiding truths? The spotlight was never meant to expose. Behind the red carpet's applause and carefully polished images were private battles, relentless rumors, and identities the public kept trying to define for them. Some spoke out, some stayed silent. But every story left a mark. Stay with us and subscribe to Black Legends Revealed for more powerful stories fame could never fully hide. Jared Carmichael. Jared Carmichael did not hand the public a neat coming-out story. He turned it into art. Before that moment, he had already built a reputation as one of the sharpest comic minds of his generation. A performer from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, who moved into stand-up, co-created and starred in The Carmichael Show, and developed a style built on calm delivery and uncomfortable honesty. But all of that changed in 2022 when Rothaniel stopped being just another HBO special and became something far riskier, a man using comedy to say the one truth he had spent years circling. What made that moment land so hard was not simply that Jared said he was gay, it was the way he said it. Rothaniel was not framed like a public relations announcement or a triumphant celebrity reveal. It felt exposed, nervous, intimate, and unfinished in the most human way. GQ described the special as a work about shame, secrets, and brutal honesty, and that is exactly why it cut deeper than a headline ever could. He was not presenting a polished version of liberation. He was showing the cost of finally speaking after years of silence, including the strain that truth put on his family. That made the special heavier, but it also made it real. What matters more in Hollywood, protecting the image or finally telling the truth even when it breaks something? That question sits at the center of Jared Carmichael's power as a character in a script like this. Unlike names shaped by rumor, he belongs here because he spoke for himself. After Rothaniel, he won the Emmy for writing the special and went on to host the 2023 Golden Globes, proving that honesty did not end his relevance. It sharpened it. Then came the Jared Carmichael reality show in 2024 and the HBO special Don't Be Gay in 2025, both of which pushed even further into discomfort, masculinity, family tension, and the public consequences of living more openly. He did not step into visibility once and stop there. He kept walking forward even when the road stayed messy. That is why Jared Carmichael stands out. He is not compelling because he fits a label. He is compelling because he refused to let the label be the whole story. In his hands, being a gay black man in entertainment is not reduced to applause, pain, or identity politics alone. It becomes something harder and richer a fight to stay funny, brilliant, vulnerable, and fully legible to himself at the same time. That is rarer than celebrity confession. That is real authorship. Colman Domingo. Colman Domingo belongs in this conversation because he did not build his career by softening who he was. He built it by expanding what a black gay actor could look like on screen. Long before the Oscar attention, he had already spent years shaping himself in the theater, moving from journalism studies at Temple University to the stage where he found the kind of work that demanded not glamour, but emotional command. That foundation still explains his power now. When Domingo appears, he does not feel manufactured for the moment. He feels earned. What makes his rise so compelling is the way it fused artistry with timing. He became widely recognized on television through Fear the Walking Dead, then reached another level through Euphoria, where his performance as Allie earned him a Primetime Emmy. But the deeper shift came when Hollywood stopped treating him like an exceptional supporting presence and started placing him at the center. Rustin made him the face of a major historical film, and Sing Sing proved that the first Oscar nomination was not a one-time breakthrough. By 2025, he had earned back-to-back Academy Award nominations for Best Actor, a rare feat that changed the scale of his legacy. When a black gay actor reaches that level without hiding, shrinking, or apologizing, is that just success? Or is it a correction? Hollywood took far too long to make. Sorry. That question sits at the heart of Domingo's story. He is openly gay, married to Raul Domingo since 2014, and has spoken with warmth about the now famous path that brought them together after a brief encounter and a Craigslist missed connection. That detail matters not because it is charming, though it is, but because it stands in direct contrast to an industry that historically taught black men, especially black gay men, to keep love hidden if they wanted power. Domingo did not accept that bargain. His public life and his work now sit beside each other without disguise. That is why Coleman Domingo feels so important in a script like this. He is not memorable only because he is talented and not only because he is visible. He matters because he carries authority. He made it to the center of the frame as himself, and in doing so, he widened the frame for the people coming after him. In Hollywood, that kind of presence is not just representation, it is a turning point. Karamo Brown. Karamo Brown did not become memorable because he was loud. He became memorable because he brought a different kind of strength into rooms that were not built to expect it. When he first appeared on The Real World Philadelphia in 2004, he was not arriving as a polished spokesman for anything. He was simply visible at a time when black gay men were still too often pushed to the edges of mainstream television. Years later, that same presence would evolve into something far bigger on Netflix's Queer Eye, where Karamo became the culture expert and helped turn emotional honesty into one of the show's defining forces. By 2026, the series had reached its final season after becoming Netflix's longest-running unscripted show, and Karamo remained one of the faces most closely tied to its emotional core. What gives his journey weight is that his authority did not come from image alone. Before television turned him into a household name, he worked in social services and psychotherapy, a background that still shapes the way he moves through the world. You can feel it in the way he listens, in the way he talks about healing, and in the way he keeps pushing conversations past style and into identity shame and self-worth. His 2019 memoir was built on exactly that tension, pain, purpose, and the difficult work of becoming whole without pretending the damage never happened. Then, there is the part of his life that changed the emotional scale of everything. In 2006, Brown learned he had a 10-year-old son, Jason. He later gained custody of Jason and eventually adopted Jason's half-brother, Christian, building a family that forced him to grow in public and private at the same time. That matters because it gives Karamo something many media figures never achieve. His advocacy does not feel borrowed. It feels lived. When a man has had to fight for his own visibility, does that make him more honest when he tells other people to stop hiding? That is why Karamo Brown belongs in a conversation like this. Not because he fits neatly into a label, but because he widened what visibility could look like. He is openly gay, a father, a former social worker, a talk show host, and a public voice for mental health and black LGBTQ+ support, including through 6 in 10. He did not rise by making himself easier for the culture to digest. He rose by proving that empathy, masculinity, queerness, and authority never needed to cancel each other out in the first place. Wanda Sykes. Wanda Sykes became impossible to dismiss when she stopped treating the public square like a place where difficult truths had to be softened first. By the time most Americans knew her as a sharp stand-up and a familiar television presence, she had already won an Emmy in 1999 for writing on The Chris Rock Show. But the real charge in her presence was never resume alone. It was the feeling that she did not step on stage to comfort a room. She stepped on stage to test it. Her comedy carried irritation, intelligence, and the kind of precision that turns laughter into exposure. She was not just making people laugh at the culture. She was forcing the culture to hear itself. That is why November 2008 remains the defining turn. California voters had just passed Proposition 8 blocking same-sex marriage, and Wanda Sykes did not respond with a carefully managed celebrity statement. She went to a rally in Las Vegas and came out publicly. The timing gave the moment its force. She had married Alex Niedbalski only weeks earlier, which meant the political blow had landed directly inside her own life. What made that moment so powerful was not confession for confession's sake. It was refusal. refusal to keep letting other people debate her existence as if it were abstract policy. How often does a comedian change the room not by landing a joke, but by making silence impossible? That was the shift. After that, her public voice carried a different weight, because the woman on stage was no longer only mocking power. She was openly confronting it. Then came a second test, and she met it with the same blunt clarity. In 2011, after a breast reduction, doctors found ductal carcinoma in situ, a non-invasive stage 0 breast cancer. Because of her family history, she chose a bilateral mastectomy. That decision says more about Wanda Sykes than any polished profile ever could. She did not build drama around fear, and she did not romanticize vulnerability. She faced it directly, made the medical choice she believed would protect her future, and talked about it without asking for pity. That is what gives Wanda Sykes her real depth. The comedy matters, but the deeper current is courage without decoration. She has repeatedly taken the part of life most people try to blur: identity exclusion, illness, and named it plainly in front of the crowd. That is why she lasts. Not because she was merely funny, but because she made honesty hit with the force of a punchline and the permanence of truth. Donnie McClurkin. Donnie McClurkin is not compelling because he fits neatly inside this title. He is compelling because he resists neatness altogether. Long before the awards, the packed churches, and the voice that could make grief sound like prayer, his life had already been marked by childhood trauma, family chaos, and abuse that cut deep into the foundations of trust, identity, and faith. That history matters, because when McClurkin later rose as one of gospel music's biggest voices, the power in songs like Stand and We Fall Down did not come from polished inspiration alone. It came from a man singing as if belief were the only thing keeping him from breaking apart. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, he had become more than a singer. He was a major force in gospel, a Grammy winner, and eventually the founder and pastor of Perfecting Faith Church. From the outside, that kind of success looks stable. But the deeper tension in McClurkin's public life was never really about fame. It was about conflict. He spoke openly over the years about having had relationships with both men and women in the past, yet he has framed those experiences through the lens of trauma and has publicly identified himself in heterosexual terms. That made him a deeply divisive figure, embraced by many churchgoers as a testimony of deliverance, challenged by many LGBTQ+ advocates who saw his message as painful, harmful, or profoundly damaging. What happens when the place a man turns to for healing is also the place that keeps his deepest conflict alive? That is the real center of Donnie McClurkin's story. Not gossip, not easy labels, not even scandal in the shallow sense. The real tension is that he has spent much of his life standing between two worlds that do not know how to forgive each other. On one side is the black church with its language of salvation, order, and doctrine. On the other is the lived complexity of sexuality, memory, and survival. McClurkin never became unforgettable because he solved that tension. He became unforgettable because he carried it in public, and because every time he sang about endurance, listeners could hear that the endurance was real. That is why he leaves such a complicated impression. To some, he is a vessel of healing whose music lifted them out of despair. To others, he embodies the pain created when trauma, faith, and sexuality are forced into a testimony that still feels unresolved. Either way, he remains impossible to dismiss because his life never offered the comfort of a simple answer. It offered struggle, conviction, and a public witness that still unsettles people now. Kevin Aviance. Kevin Aviance was never built for the background. He came out of New York nightlife like a live voltage surge, towering, theatrical, gender-bending, and impossible to ignore. Born Eric Sneed in Richmond, Virginia, he moved through Washington and into New York, where the House of Aviance and the ballroom club world gave him the kind of stage traditional entertainment rarely offered black queer performers. There, he did not simply perform songs. He turned presence into an art form. In the 1990s, his records and appearances made him a fixture of queer nightlife, and tracks like Cunty became more than club music. They became language, attitude, and identity for a scene that had long been inventing culture before the mainstream learned how to name it. That is what makes Kevin Aviance so compelling. He represents a kind of black queer brilliance that was shaping taste from the margins while the center still pretended not to see it. He was not polished into acceptability. He was excessive on purpose, heels, makeup, spectacle, wit, command. And that excess was never empty. It was armor, theater, rebellion, glamour, and survival folded into one body. Long before corporations discovered inclusion as a marketing word, Kevin Aviance was already showing what radical self-invention looked like in public. Then came the part of his life that gave the glamour a scar no one could ignore. In 2006, Aviance was brutally attacked outside a gay bar in Manhattan in what authorities prosecuted as a hate crime. He suffered severe injuries, including a broken jaw, but what lingers is not only the violence. It is the refusal that followed. He returned to public life carrying the reality of what that attack meant. A black queer artist could electrify a city at night and still be punished for existing in it by morning. How much strength does it take to keep performing after the world tries to beat the performance out of you? That question is the center of Kevin Aviance's power. He is not unforgettable only because he looked extraordinary. He is unforgettable because he kept turning pain back into visibility. Years later, when Beyoncé sampled Cunty on Pure/Honey from Renaissance, it felt like more than a credit. It felt like overdue recognition. Aviance himself said he was overwhelmed, and the moment reintroduced his voice to a younger audience while confirming something his original world already knew. Kevin Aviance was never a side note. He was part of the blueprint. So when you write Kevin Aviance, the real pull is not novelty, it is endurance. He stands at the crossroads of ballroom nightlife, black queer art, violence, and survival. He made himself unforgettable before the culture caught up, and even after the cost of that visibility became brutally clear, he still refused to dim. Jeremy Pope. Jeremy Pope's rise did not feel like the usual Hollywood climb. It felt more like a locked door being opened from the inside. Before film audiences knew his face, Broadway had already begun to understand what made him different. He was not merely polished, not merely gifted, but emotionally exact. In 2019, he pulled off something almost unheard of, earning 2 Tony nominations in the same season, one for playing Ferris in Choir Boy and another for Eddie Kendricks in Ain't Too Proud. That achievement placed him in rare company in Tony Awards history, and it announced something bigger than momentum. A black queer performer was no longer asking for room at the edge of the stage. He was taking the center without softening who he was. What gives Jeremy Pope unusual depth is the way identity and performance keep meeting in the same place. Public profiles around his awards run note that he grew up black and gay in Orlando, Florida, and that connection made roles like Ferris resonate with unusual force. Then came Hollywood on Netflix, where he played Archie Coleman, an aspiring black gay screenwriter trying to force his way into an industry built to shut men like him out. The role brought him an Emmy nomination, and suddenly the pattern was impossible to miss. Pope was not just landing parts, he was repeatedly stepping into characters shaped by exclusion, longing, and the fight to be seen whole. How often does an actor arrive with talent this sharp and timing this exact? His presence never feels accidental. It feels like someone finally catching up to a space that should have made room for him much sooner. That tension reached its most intimate form with The Inspection, where Pope played Ellis French, a homeless queer black man entering the Marines during the don't ask, don't tell era while still chasing love from a rejecting mother. The performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination, but the more revealing part was what Pope himself said afterward. The film brought up hard truths and became a healing process for him. That is why Jeremy Pope lands with such force. He does not project distance. He makes ambition hurt grace and hunger occupy the same frame. By the time the spotlight found him, he already understood something many actors spend decades chasing. The deepest performances are not built from pretending. They are built from recognition. Jeffrey Bowyer Chapman. Jeffrey Bowyer Chapman entered public life carrying a kind of visibility that sounds glamorous from a distance and brutal up close. He was adopted as an infant raised in rural Alberta, and has spoken about what it meant to grow up Black, queer, and visibly different in places that offered very little room for any of those truths. Before the camera ever turned him into a recognizable face, he already understood what it felt like to be watched, measured, and misread. That early tension is what gives his presence weight. He did not come into entertainment looking for permission. He came into it already knowing what it costs to stand out. What makes Jeffrey compelling is that his rise was never built on shock value. It was built on control. Modeling took him across continents while he was still young, but acting gave him the language to do something deeper. On Unreal, he played Jay, a gay Black producer, moving through a manipulative television world, and the role gave him something rare on screen, a character who was not reduced to one trait, one stereotype, or one lesson. That mattered. Because for a long time, Black queer men in mainstream entertainment were either erased completely or flattened into side notes. Jeffrey did not just appear in that space, he helped make it harder to ignore. Then visibility turned vicious. His time on Canada's Drag Race should have marked another step upward, but instead it exposed the uglier side of public attention. Jeffrey later spoke about the racist and abusive backlash he faced, and about how deeply uncomfortable the experience became even behind the scenes. That is where his presence becomes more than stylish or charismatic. It becomes costly. What does it say about representation when the moment a Black queer man becomes fully visible, the culture rushes to punish him for taking up space? Jeffrey did not leave that period looking louder. He left it looking clearer, like someone who had learned that being seen is never the same as being safe. That is why Jeffrey Bowyer Chapman belongs in a script like this. Not because he fits a label, but because he exposes the distance between inclusion as branding and inclusion as lived reality. He has remained openly gay, continued acting, and kept building a career that includes Doogie Kamealoha, MD, and other screen work, without shrinking himself to make the public more comfortable. That is what stays with you. Not just the beauty, not just the backlash, the refusal to disappear. Daryl Stevens. Daryl Stevens belongs to a very specific kind of Hollywood history, the kind written by people who got visible before the industry knew what to do with them. He is best known as Noah Nicholson on Noah's Ark the Logo dramedy that premiered in 2005 and became one of the first television series built around Black gay men, loving fighting, dating, and simply existing at the center of the frame. That matters because Stevens was not playing a coded side character or a fleeting symbolic role. He was carrying a lead performance in a space television had avoided for years. In later interviews, he spoke about how groundbreaking the series was for showing Black gay men with Black partners, for addressing HIV openly, and for presenting effeminate men without apology. What made his presence powerful was not only talent, it was timing. He arrived in public before that kind of visibility had become easier to package. That early breakthrough came with a cost. Stevens later said he had been warned not to take Noah's Ark because it was too gay a warning that reveals almost everything about the industry climate around him. He took it anyway, and the role became career-defining in both the best and hardest ways. It gave him recognition, cultural importance, and a place in a show that still carries emotional weight for viewers who rarely saw Black queer lives treated with tenderness on television. But it also narrowed the way the business looked at him. A 2015 Los Angeles Times piece on Hollywood's reluctance to feature gay Black actors pointed directly to the problem of niche casting, and Stevens has spoken about the complicated aftermath of becoming so strongly identified with one breakthrough role. How many actors change the screen and still have to fight to keep the industry from shrinking them afterward? That tension sits at the center of him. What gives Daryl Stevens real depth now is that he did not vanish inside that label. He kept working in projects like Boy Culture, Another Gay Movie, Be Positive, and Lovecraft Country. And in 2020, he became a father to a daughter through surrogacy, a life change he later described as profoundly shifting his priorities. That detail lands because it reveals a man who kept building beyond the part the public first attached to him. Daryl Stevens remains compelling, not because he was a first in some empty ceremonial sense, but because he helped push Black queer visibility into the open and then had to live with the burden of being ahead of his moment. Brandon Kyle Goodman. Brandon Kyle Goodman does not feel like someone who waited to be accepted. They feel like someone who understood early that waiting too long can cost you your voice. On their official site, Goodman describes themselves as a writer, actor, host, and sexual and mental wellness advocate. That list matters because it explains why they land differently from many performers. They are not just stepping into roles. They are building language around identity, intimacy, and freedom, then carrying that language into everything they do. In a Hollywood culture that still tries to flatten Black queer lives into something easier to market, Goodman's presence resists simplification. What makes Brandon Kyle Goodman so compelling is that their career did not rise from one carefully packaged breakout. It expanded through intention. They became widely known through Big Mouth and its spin-off Human Resources, where they wrote and voiced Walter, a queer love bug whose humor and tenderness gave queer identity a kind of warmth television often denies it. Goodman told them that the drive behind the work came from not seeing authentic three-dimensional representation of queer Black people on screen. That is the key to understanding them. They were not just trying to join the machine. They were trying to correct what the machine kept leaving out. What happens when a Black queer artist stops asking to be included and starts creating the language that inclusion has to answer to? That is where Goodman's segment becomes stronger than a standard career profile. Their work is not only about visibility, it is about excavation. Through Messy Mondays, their podcast, Tell Me Something Messy, and their 2022 book, You Gotta Be, Goodman keeps returning to the same deeper question: who would we be if shame, performance, and other people's expectations had not gotten there first? In them, they described the book as a reckoning with race, gender, sexuality, and the ways society gets its hands on a person before that person fully knows themselves. That idea gives everything they do a deeper pulse. The performance is never just performance. It is reclamation. That is why Brandon Kyle Goodman belongs in a title like this. Not because they fit a stereotype, but because they break one open. They are openly queer, non-binary, and impossible to reduce to one lane. Actor, writer, host, advocate, each role sharpens the others, and that is what keeps them memorable. They do not just represent visibility. They represent the harder thing that comes after visibility, living so fully in your truth that the culture has to adjust its frame around you. These stories were never only about identity. They were also about pressure, privacy, and the emotional cost of living under constant public scrutiny. Some stars chose openness and faced judgment. Others protected their private lives and were questioned anyway. That is what makes this conversation so complex. In Hollywood, is authenticity truly respected or only accepted when it fits the image people expect? Now we want to hear from you. Which story stayed with you the most? And do you think fame still makes it harder for people to live honestly? Share your thoughts below and follow and subscribe to Black Legends Revealed.